The rise and fall of the ultimately harmful Hollywood Hays Code reflects the continuous struggle between traditional and progressive groups over rights and responsibilities. The Roaring Twenties, a time of significant economic, cultural, and social change. The First World War had just come to an end, after which the United States emerged as the predominant global superpower. With the 1920s came a booming economy, stimulated by the rise of mass consumerism. The Harlem Renaissance brought black culture into the American mainstream. Flappers challenged societal norms with non-traditional clothing and behavior that defied established gender conventions. Amidst these years of rapid change came the rise of American cinema. Silent movie stars like Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, Clara Bow, and Douglas Fairbanks were all the rage. Then came the talkies, the first sound-on-film movies. 1926's Don Juan and 1927's The Jazz Singer both proved to be massive box office successes. The vertically integrated studio system dominated this era, made up of the Big Five. These five studios produced 95% of American movies from 1927 to 1948, all the while owning and directly presiding over theaters themselves. By 1929, these movie palaces welcomed up to 90 million people a week. This was truly the golden age of Hollywood. The content of these films, however, was starting to be questioned by traditionalists, particularly Protestant and Catholic groups who feared that the immorality of contemporary Hollywood was negatively impacting the American populace. Films of this era often included sex and violence, unafraid of potentially disreputable subject matter. A series of controversies that called into question not only the morals of Hollywood films, but Hollywood itself, was the last factor that drove moralists to take action. These events, coupled with the racy films of the era, were met with an enormous wave of backlash from many concerned about the influence of Hollywood's depravity on the American people. For fear of direct censorship by the federal government, Hollywood, eager to redeem their tarnished image, decided instead to institute their own regulations on studio films. In 1922, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, or MPPDA, was formed. Former campaign manager and postmaster general for Warren G. Harding, Presbyterian William Harrison Hayes Sr. was made its chairman, with the goal of cleaning up Hollywood once and for all. A relatively simple list of 36 don'ts and be carefuls was employed in 1927, outlining subjects that directors should either be cautious in depicting or avoid altogether. This document prohibited any and all profanity, nudity, illegal drug trade, explicit criminality, and sex perversion, while requesting that filmmakers stray away from potentially controversial depictions of topics like organized religion, law enforcement, and the institution of marriage. Eventually, in 1930, a full motion picture production code created by Will Hays was finalized by Catholic leaders Martin Quigley and Father Daniel A. Lord. This was the Hays Code. The code, however, would not be seriously enforced until 1934. After the stock market crash of 1929 and the start of the Great Depression, attendance at the cinema hit an all-time low, so studios were forced to find a way to get people back into theaters. How did they go about this? Sexual material and violent crime were rampant in the films of this era. Studios began to incorporate as much risque content as they could to lure audiences back in. The period from roughly 1930 to 1934 became known as the pre-code era, which produced some of the most boundary-pushing films Hollywood had seen up to that point. Gangster flicks like Little Caesar, The Public Enemy, and Scarface were sympathetic towards their mobster-leading men. Homosexuality was far more normalized than it would become once the Hays Code came into full effect, exemplified by films like Morocco and Queen Christina. In Philadelphia, 1934, Cardinal Dennis Doherty led a boycott of movie theaters. Ticket sales decreased by 20% as hundreds of thousands of Catholics banded together to protest the sins of Hollywood. This boycott, along with unceasing pressure from the Catholic Legion of Decency, prompted the creation of the Production Code Administration, or PCA, led by Catholic layman Joseph Ignatius Breen. This was the true beginning of the Hays Code's reign in Hollywood. Breen enforced the code with an iron fist from 1934 to 1954. Every script had to be given his approval before shooting began, and once the film was finished, it had to be scoured for any remaining objectionable content. The depictions of violence and sexuality that pervaded the pre-code era would no longer be tolerated. There had to be a clear distinction between what was morally acceptable and what wasn't. The code detailed its general principles. No picture shall be produced that will lower the moral standards of those who see it. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation. Many of the Hays Code's restrictions, however, were based in racism, misogyny, and homophobia. Interracial romance was entirely prohibited, as were depictions of, specifically, white slavery. Non-white characters usually existed merely in subservient background roles. Harmful and oppressive views on gender were also perpetuated, with female characters usually occupying the roles of wife, mother, or daughter, often portrayed as nothing more than accessories to men. Homosexuality was essentially forbidden, as it was considered a sex perversion by Catholics and other more conservative groups. When a non-straight person was depicted, they were almost always given the part of the villain. If not, they were used as comic relief, their sexuality being played for laughs. The establishment of the code sparked a debate. Did filmmakers have the right to portray particular controversial subjects on screen? What was the extent of their moral responsibility to the public? Did the government and the church have the right or the responsibility to take away creative freedom if it meant abiding by their values and moral concerns? Due to Joseph Breen's relentless enforcement of these overwhelming restrictions, filmmakers had to find ways to get around them, hiding more taboo subjects. Directors like Alfred Hitchcock, Otto Preminger, and Billy Wilder were famous for skirting the code, using the power of innuendo, implication, and editing to convey what they wanted to, while still earning the PCA stamp of approval. The endings of many now classic films had to be altered to abide by the code. The original endings of It Happened One Night, Casablanca, and Double Indemnity were all changed due to suggestion of sex, adultery, and suicide, respectively. In 1948, United States v. Paramount Pictures ruled that the Hollywood studio system was in violation of antitrust laws due to their monopolization of the industry, specifically their control over movie theaters. The working studio system was abolished, allowing for the emergence of smaller studios along with the distribution of foreign films in the US. The PCA had no jurisdiction over these films, whose content would certainly not get past the censors at the Hays office. European films starring icons like Brigitte Bardot grew increasingly popular in the United States. This was further indicative of changing American tastes and a desire for greater progressivism in popular culture. Joseph Burstyn Inc. v. Wilson ruled that films were in fact protected by First Amendment rights. This 1952 case was a major step towards greater progressiveness in film, as the censorship of the Hays Code was now viewed by many as bordering on unconstitutional. After Breen's departure from the PCA in 1954, the power of the Hays Code gradually weakened. The times were changing. The code underwent a significant revision by Jeffrey Sherlock and Martin Quigley in late 1956, making its guidelines significantly more lenient than those of the original rendition. Billy Wilder's 1959 hit comedy Some Like It Hot pushed the boundaries of the code even further, while proving to be a major commercial success. The popularity of movies like this marked a turning point away from the extreme conservatism of the code. The Hays Code died out over the course of the ensuing several years until 1968 when it was officially abandoned. The code was then replaced by the MPAA rating system that we use today. The rise and fall of the Hays Code is a prime example of the historically recurring battle over rights and responsibilities between traditional and progressive groups, the constant push and pull between conservatism and liberalism in the US. The power the code held over Hollywood, and in turn American society as a whole, contributed significantly to the regressive nature of the 30s and 40s. Its abolition was a major cultural shift, indicative of the gradual 20th century move from traditionalism to progressivism in American society. The death of the Hays Code was a primary influence on the American social climate leading into the counterculture movement of the 60s and 70s. It gave way to the New Hollywood movement, in which films explored more difficult and controversial subject matter with greater creative freedom than ever allowed before. The abolition of the Hays Code had many long-term effects as well. It was a step towards greater tolerance of historically discriminated against groups and a move towards greater liberalism in popular culture, art, and media. The abandonment of the Hays Code has led to greater acceptance and recognition of independent and foreign films by Hollywood today, specifically movies made by or representing minorities and other historically marginalized groups, exemplified in the acclaim for 20th century films like Brokeback Mountain, Moonlight, Parasite, Everything Everywhere All at Once, and many more. Despite this, the era of the Hays Code had considerably negative effects, many of which are still seen in Hollywood today. Even with steps taken towards greater tolerance and inclusivity, discrimination against women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ+ community has certainly not vanished. These groups are still vastly underrepresented, not only in front of the camera but behind it as well. Many harmful stereotypes subtly persist in modern popular film, whether we know it or not. Film is an incredibly powerful and vital art form, a continuous reflection of and influence on society. It is a medium that provokes empathy and thought, an essential expression of humanity and creativity. There is a balance to be struck by filmmakers in Hollywood between the rights of pure artistic expression and the responsibility of influence. Censorship can be dangerous, particularly as it relates to cinema. The values shown on screen naturally bleed into society, and if, as during the era of the Hays Code, these values are discriminatory and regressive, it could be profoundly harmful. Now, more than ever, we need to talk to each other, to listen to each other and understand how we see the world. And cinema is the best medium for doing this.